Well, hello and good morning, Faith Church. It is Thursday, 10 o'clock, and welcome to Bible study. Let's join in. Together we'll sing this song. This is an oldie but goodie, Just a Closer Walk with Thee. I am weak, but Thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Jesus, grant it is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but Thee, dear Lord, none but Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to Thy kingdom shore, to Thy shore. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. All right, let's take a time to pray together. God, we're grateful that You are here with us today. We are so awed by Your presence, how it shows up time and time again. And we enjoy Your presence today. We look forward to the guiding of Your Spirit as we open up Your Word. And we ask that You would help us to have the courage and openness to receive what You would speak to us today. We pray this in Your name. Amen. All right. Good to see we've got folks joined in already, and glad that you're here today. Let's say hello real quick to Judy and Paula, Bob and Carol, Warren, Diane, Karen, and Mike. Glad all of you are joining in right now, and thank you for being here. I hope that you're looking forward to what we have in store. So last week we opened up the book of Genesis, chapter 1, and we are reading from the Message Devotional Bible. And this is written by Eugene Peterson, who has written the Message Bible. This is the devotional version of that Bible, so it has notes and reflections that are included in along with the text. This is what you'd call maybe a paraphrase version of the scriptures. So this is more a version of the Bible that is looking for an inward experience of what the scriptures have to say, kind of a feeling of the text. It's very different from some of the other more literal texts that are just looking to achieve some kind of an academic or rational translation of words as they appeared in manuscripts to what their equivalents would be in our language. And that is more of a rational brain thinking type of an exercise. And so, we as human beings, we Some of us are wired more one way or the other. Overall, we need both in our life. We need the rational thinking part. We need the feeling part as well. And I thought, normally we spend most of our time, at least if I'm leading Bible studies, I tend to lean toward the scholarly and academic English translations of the text if I'm using them for Bible study. And I decided, let me do something different with this text, and let us approach the scriptures for a while we're using this Bible from more of a feeling and heart type of a perspective. Eugene Peterson, is the sole translator of this English translation. The general practice is to use like a big group of people, a group of scholars together, and there's kind of a committee consensus on what English words end up in those translations. This is not something that he was dealing with, but instead he's doing it on his own. Eugene Peterson is a pastor of many, many years. He's also a writer and a poet. So he's looking for the poetry of the scriptures and the feeling of the scriptures. So that's what we're gonna enjoy today. We left off in the first part of Genesis 2 because what we find, as I talked about last week, is we find in Genesis two creation stories. The first one we find in Genesis 1, and then the second one we find starting in Genesis chapter 2. The first chapter of Genesis talks about the days of creation, has kind of a formula in place for day 1, day 2, day 3. And yes, Jason, I am using the hippie Bible, and I don't know, maybe I had some hippies in my congregation that inspired me to do that. Who knows? The first creation story of Genesis in chapter 1 is laid out in kind of a formulaic way, and it is still poetry. It's still poetry in the sense that it's written as poetry. And if you studied any poetry, and I'm sure you either loved doing it or you didn't like doing it, elementary, high school, and maybe beyond, you learn that certain types of poetry have certain rules. If you're going to write a sonnet, if you're going to write a haiku, you follow certain rules in terms of how many lines you have and which ones rhyme and all that kind of a thing. So we can see in Genesis 1, there's certain formulas that are in place. And if we look back, I'm just going to do this real quick for one of the days. And so we see in Genesis 1, God spoke, something happened, it was good. And then, after that, it's evening and it's morning the first day. And that's kind of the pattern for each one of those days, 1 through 6. And I showed you last time, and if you want to look at the details, you can look at last week's study. We can see that the first 3 days are layered on top of the second 3 days. So you got day 1, 2, and 3, and then day 4, 5, and 6. Day 1 matches up with day 4, day 2 matches up with day 5, day 3 matches up with day 6 in terms of the types of things that were created. Light on day 1 matches up with the sun on day 4. So you see this pattern in this text. When we get into the first few verses of Genesis 2, we have day 7. We're still using a 7-day week. Even though thousands and thousands of years have passed, it seems like we haven't found an updated or improved way to have a week of 5 days, 8 days, 10 days. It seems like it's kind of fit for us as human beings to keep those patterns. So we see the week used, a creation week used in this text. In day 7, it's interesting because day 7, for one, it's not those that compiled the Bible decided not to put day 7 into chapter 1. That's interesting. If you look at the way that this day is described, it doesn't match the patterns that we see in those other days. Now, part of the reason is it's talking about God is resting. So resting is very different from the work that takes place in the first 6 days. And the other thing is that it doesn't say, and the morning and evening were the seventh day. And I hadn't seen that, or that hadn't popped off the page of me for a long time. And then I saw a study on this, and there indeed, it doesn't have an evening or morning were the seventh day. And there can be different ideas about why this is the case. Maybe it's because God just finished with everything and he's not doing any more creating from nothing. Now, from this point on, if there is any creation taking place, it's the type of creation that he has talked about in the sixth day, where he tells the plants, the animals, the humans, he tells them to reproduce. This really jumped out at me enough that I think that might be what the sermon is on for this Sunday. God blessed them, and he says, prosper, reproduce, and fill the earth and take charge. So this idea of reproducing means you're taking what God has already put in front of you that you're responsible for, you're taking that and then you're reproducing it. And that's where creation takes place within us and around us. God has already put everything there from nothing, and then God asks us to be a part of ongoing creation through reproduction or reproducing. And so God finished with his part of the deal, and now he's working along with us in reproducing and keeping life going. And so that's the seventh day. Now, we're going to look today at Genesis 2, starting in verse 5, at the second creation story. And this is the story of Adam and Eve. We don't have names of the humans in the first creation story. We see that it says God created humans, male and female, he created them. They were a good thing. And so now we're going to look at a story that's told a little bit differently. So if you want to follow in your Bibles, we're looking at Genesis chapter 2, verses 5 through 7. And here we go. At the time God made earth and heaven, before any grasses or shrubs had sprouted from the ground, God hadn't yet sent rain on earth, nor was there anyone around to work the ground. The whole earth was watered by underground springs. God formed man out of the dirt from the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. The man came alive, a living soul. So this is verses 5 through 7. This idea of where the water comes in, it kind of matches up the last story that we saw, the first creation story. We see that God has just kind of water there, and then he separates the water from the sky, and the water, and then let's see, the sky. He separates the sky from the water, and then he also separates the land from the water. So the water is kind of the introductory element. It's the first thing there. And we see that this creation story also starts with water and talks about how there was water under the ground, and that's how things were watered. Why is it important to say that there was no rain, or why was there no rain in this story? Who knows? It's the first thing that I would think of in terms of rain is that a little bit, or sometime later, we're going to have the story of Noah and the ark, and of course that rain is something that brings destruction and death and recreation. But this tells us that God hadn't sent rain yet, and then he forms man out of the dirt, and man comes alive. Then God planted a garden in Eden in the east. He put the man he had just made in it. God made all kinds of trees grow from the ground, trees beautiful to look at and good to eat. The tree of life was in the middle of the garden, also the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden from there divides into 4 rivers. The first is named Pishon. It flows through Havilah, where there is gold. The gold is the land. The gold of this land is good. The land is also known for a sweet-scented resin and the onyx stone. The second river is named Gihon. It flows through the land of Cush. The third river is named Hiddekel and flows east of Assyria. The fourth river is the Euphrates. God took the man and set him down in the Garden of Eden to work the ground and keep it in order. So in this creation story, we can see from the beginning, we're skipping over all of this process of God creating things. At this point, the only thing that this story is concerned with is the creation of man and the planting of the Garden of Eden. It goes into a little bit of detail about where the garden is located and how it's in a place that is connected to other areas that the readers may be familiar with. And then he talks about God planting the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so he creates, in this story, he's creating a special place, a unique place to put man. In the first story, it's more talking about everything is being created and everything is for everybody and everybody is a part of it. You know, creation and plants and stuff included. Verse 16, God commanded the man, "You can eat from any tree of the garden except from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from it. The moment that you eat from the tree, you're dead." God said, "It's not good for the man to be alone. I'll make him a helper, a companion." So God formed from the dirt of the ground all the animals of the field and all the birds of the air. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them. Whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. The man named the cattle, named the birds of the air, named the wild animals, but he didn't find a suitable companion. So here we have, as soon as the man is put into the garden, he's got all this he has these plants and trees and shrubs and everything around him, but it says it's not good for him to be alone. So the first thing that God does is he creates all these creatures. And then he has Adam, he has the man, to be involved in the process of naming the animals. And naming is naming things in different cultures kind of has different connotations or importance. When you name something, it could be different things. It could be ownership. It could be just recognizing the difference between one thing and another. But there is some kind of an interaction and involvement in what God does and what the man does. So we see that God is wanting the man to be a part of this creation, to share in this creation experience. That's why he brings everything before the man to name him. But it says he didn't find a suitable companion. He was friends with all these animals, but it just didn't fill that little spot in him that needed someone closer. Verse 21, God put the man into a deep sleep. As he slept, he removed one of his ribs and placed it with flesh. God then used the rib that he had taken from the man to make woman and presented her to the man. Verse 23, the man said, "Finally, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, name her woman, for she was made from man. Therefore a man leaves his father and mother and embraces his wife. They become one flesh. The two of them, the man and his wife, were naked, but they felt no shame." So this is the conclusion of chapter 2, and the story will continue on, and we'll look at it. So here we have the man falling asleep. The woman comes from the man, and he says, "This is what I was looking for." I've done some word studies on this. Of course, this story of the first man, the first woman, these stories have played a part in a lot of our theologies, in our ways of viewing men and women. They're very well-known stories around the world. And our concept of how this happened can feed into other ideas about the relationship between the man and the woman. I did read something interesting many years ago talking about if we look at these words for man and woman, the name for man is very similar to the name for dirt, and I think the word is Adam and Adama, something like that. And so the reason why the man has a name that's so similar is because that's where he comes from. So man comes from the dirt, woman comes from the man. It's an interesting sequence of events. This is not what it really looks like in the first creation story in Genesis 1. It really doesn't go into any detail. Genesis 1 says God created humans. He created them male and female. He said it was good, and it just kind of leaves it at that. There's not this chronological sequence of this detail happened first, this detail happened second, this detail happened third. We see earlier that the idea of naming seems to be important, and then later on, as this woman comes from the man names the woman. And so he recognizes and gives a name to woman, and woman is also in the original languages is also very close to dirt, man, woman. They're all very similar to one another, that we have come from this creation of God. And we see something interesting here. This might look like a prophetic kind of a statement. He says, "Therefore a man leaves his father and mother and embraces his wife. They become one flesh. The two of the man and wife were naked, but they felt no shame." That one line in there, "Therefore a man leaves his father and embraces his wife, and they become one flesh." This is something that hasn't happened in the story yet. There is, at this point, no such thing as father and mother, because the man's being created from the dirt, the woman's being created from the man. Comes out of it. There are a lot of conclusions that are drawn. Some, many theologies or ways of thinking within religious communities that hold on to this story and have the story be important to them has often said that one thing is more important than the other because one comes first before the other. Well, if you say that the man is more important than the woman because the man comes first and then the woman comes out of the man, then you're kind of saying the dirt is more important than the man because the dirt came before the man. I don't know that we hold on to that. If you're going to come from something, would you rather come from the dirt or would you rather come from another person? Interesting things to think about. And this, again, is kind of a literary, poetic way to describe the first things happening. Nobody else is there except for these two people in this story. So how does this story get passed on, and what is the importance of it? That's something that keeps us coming back to this story over and over again. So we got humans being created from the earth, we got the garden, we've got the command not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we have the appearance of the tree of life, and then we have the man and woman, along with the naming of the animals, man and woman coming on the scene, and we see the relationship is to become one flesh. Even though there are two of them, they are to become one flesh. And then the last thing it ends on is they were naked, they felt no shame. So they were free, they were confident, they were a part of creation. Shame was not a part of the experience in the Garden of Eden. And that's important. It's saying, out of all these good things that are happening, the only kind of indicator that we have that there might be the potential for bad is we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and which is a very interesting name. It's like, if you eat from the tree, then you will know the difference between good and evil. Apparently, before eating from this, they didn't know the difference, or didn't know that there was a difference, or there was no difference between good and evil. And we see in here that they don't feel shame. That would be a negative thing. They didn't feel shame because they hadn't eaten from the tree yet. Let me go back. This is one of the notes. Let me see if this fits with what we're doing today here. Okay, so let me read. This is a note from Eugene Peterson. This is in regards to Genesis 2, verses 1 through 15, and this is what he says. While Genesis 1 is structured by time, Genesis 2 is structured by place. Place is a companion gift to go with time. It locates us on the earth, where we become oriented, find work, experience freedom in obedience, and find companionship in a community of others. The place in these early chapters of Genesis is defined as a garden as opposed to the wilderness. A garden implies boundaries and intention. It isn't limitless everywhere or anywhere, it's local. God planted a garden in the east. Everything that the Creator God does in forming us as humans is done in a place. One of the seductions that bedevils Christian formation is the construction of utopias, ideal places where the righteous life can be lived unimpeded. The word utopia literally means no place. But we can live our lives only in an actual place, not in an artificial place. Once in times past, that place was Eden. But ever since the fall, that place has been east of Eden, in a land of thorned resistance that opposes not only the work of our own hands, but also the work of God's hands as he labors to form Christ in us. And we'll look at the fall in just a moment. All right, here we go. Now we're going to look at chapter 3. Here's where the story starts to get a little complicated. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. The serpent was clever, more clever than any wild animal God had made. He spoke to the woman. Do I understand that God told you not to eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, Not at all. We can eat from the trees in the garden. It's only about the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, Don't eat from it. Don't even touch it or you'll die. The serpent told the woman, You won't die. God knows that the moment you eat from that tree, you will see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil. When the woman saw that the tree looked like good eating and realized that she would get out of it, what she would get out of it, she would know everything. She took and ate the fruit and gave some to her husband, and he ate. All right, so here's the introduction. This is the first 6 verses of Genesis chapter 3. We have the introduction of the serpent. We have the serpent talking. We have the serpent to ask the woman, what's up with this command not to eat? And then he goes on to explain why. Now, God, in this story so far that we have, never really explained why they should not eat of one tree or the next. We don't see them asking why. We don't see God explaining why. Now we see the serpent and the woman, two of God's creations, speaking with one another and talking about the why. Why do you think God doesn't want us to eat from it? It looks like the woman hadn't really answered it. She kind of added, don't even touch. I don't think that was in the original requirements from God, but it definitely, she knows that she's not supposed to eat it or she's going to die. And then the serpent goes on and says, well, the way that you understand things is probably not true. And then he goes on to say, I think this is why you should not eat of it. It's because if you do, you'll be like God. Now, there's nothing in here that talks about whether or not the serpent ate already of the tree. Maybe he ate of the tree, and maybe his mind is now open and he's thinking very differently than it did before, and he wants to share what his experience was with the woman. He's definitely saying God hasn't told you everything, and they are speculating as to why God told them. This is one of those stories that we have tried to come back to and understand. We're asking why ourselves. Why does God place something in the garden that is off limits? If it's off limits, why not put it outside of the garden and then we don't have to deal with it? Why place temptation or the potential for temptation in the garden? And this is now this gets into the whole question of the role that God plays in evil in creation. How does God, who creates a good universe, we've seen from Genesis 1 and 2, everything that we see here tells us that everything that God did was good. How does God create all this good stuff, even humans? And then how does evil enter into the world? Or how does chaos or bad things, how does it enter into this good place that God has created? And this is one of the stories that's trying to describe it. It's another type of poetic literary description of why. It still is one of those stories that keeps us thinking and thinking, because I think it's one of those mysterious questions that I don't know that we'll ever know the answer for. We do see that God is giving people the freedom to choose, and theologians over centuries have talked about how the freedom to choose is an important part of God's creation. It's not spelled out overtly, the freedom to choose, but it is implicit in the story. God says, you can have all this and don't do this, so it's up to you to make those decisions. So they decided to eat of it, and here's what happens. Immediately, this is verse 7 of Genesis 3. Immediately, the two of them did see what's really going on, saw themselves naked. They sewed the fig leaves together as makeshift clothes for themselves. When they heard the sound of God strolling in the garden in the evening breeze, the man and his wife hid in the trees of the garden, hid from God. God called the man, "Where are you?" He said, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid." God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from?" So here's this next scene. The first scene is with the serpent and the woman. This next scene is with Adam or the man, the woman, and God. interesting that the first thing that happens after they eat is they realize that they're naked. So as soon as they do it, they experience shame. So we see that before they ate of it, they were already naked, but they were not ashamed. As soon as they eat it, they become ashamed. So shame plays a big part in this story, and shame is a powerful emotion or concept that we have in our personal lives. It's if you've gone through life feeling shame and then gone through life not feeling shame, you can definitely feel the difference. One is a more joyful and light and free kind of an experience without shame. With shame, there is this sense of you're kind of losing your joy and happiness, and you're kind of feeling bad about yourself or about life. So shame is the first thing that comes in. So it's almost like their conscience was it came alive. They didn't really need that conscience before this, because this is the first thing that they've done that was like a bad choice or a wrong choice. As soon as they eat, the conscience kicks in and they realize, ooh, I'm ashamed. I shouldn't have done this. And then look at me. I'm so ashamed. So the next thing they want to do is they want to cover the shame. They want to hide the shame. And isn't that interesting this kind of a experience is very much what we experience as human beings today. Thousands and thousands of years later, we still struggle with doing something and then realizing through our conscience that we've done something to be ashamed of, and then we try to handle it in some way. Notice they don't apologize. We'll see kind of their reactions, but the first thing they don't do is eat it and then realize it and then run to God and say, God, I know you told me to do it, but please, I'm very sorry. That wasn't their experience. Their experience was, let me try to take care of this on my own. Maybe if I cover it up, then God won't know, or we will forget about it because we can't see the shame in one another. God said, who told you were naked? Did you eat from the tree I told you not to eat from? The man said, the woman you gave me as a companion, she gave me the fruit from the tree, and yes, I ate it. So we can see here this is such a human response. The man does admit that I ate this fruit, but he's not taking full responsibility for it. He's not saying, God, I know you told me not to, and I did it anyway. Please forgive me. How can I make this better? No, what he says is, well, he's like, I ate it, but it's really not my fault. In a way, he starts to blame God. He says, the woman you gave me as a companion. So he's blaming the woman. He's blaming God. And then he's saying, I ate it just because you gave me the woman and the woman gave it to me. He's not taking responsibility on so many levels. God, if you hadn't given me the woman, I wouldn't have eaten it. And woman, if you hadn't given me the fruit, I wouldn't have eaten it. I'm better than this. But he does admit that he ate it. So he's deflecting. He's not taking responsibility. God said to the woman, what is this that you've done? This is her response. The serpent seduced me, she said, and I ate. So the man the man doesn't take responsibility, and he goes and he asks the woman, and the woman doesn't take responsibility. She's like, it was that serpent in the tree. He seduced me and I ate it. So there's nothing in here there's nothing in here, which is interesting. There's nothing in here that says the man was tempted to eat of the tree, or that the woman was tempted to eat of the tree on their own. It's not a story about them walking through the garden and he sees the tree and it was so beautiful and it looked so tasty and, oh, I'm tempted on my own, I'm going to eat of it. But instead, it's like the woman has a conversation that kind of, the serpent is a good salesman. He convinces her it's a good thing to do. It's not so bad. It's not so bad. Just try it out. It's something good is going to happen. God just didn't want you to have this good thing. He was holding back from you. So she buys into this lie or this half-truth. And then the man, it doesn't really go into detail about the man. It just says, it says she took the fruit and gave it some to her husband and he ate. So it seems like the man didn't need any convincing. Now it doesn't say that she gave him some fruit, but she didn't tell him where it was from. It doesn't say that she made the same convincing argument that the serpent did. It does say that she took and ate the fruit and then gave some to her husband. So she eats it first, and then she has a changed experience. Her understanding of the tree is different, and then she goes and shares it with her husband. So she may not have made that decision before eating the fruit. The fruit changed her. The husband seems like he didn't need much convincing. He just ate it. And then they don't take responsibility. Let me just read this note here. This is from Peterson. Agreed to be God. A curious thing that happens to us when we get a taste of God. It happened in Eden and it keeps happening today. The experience of God, the ecstasy, the wholeness of it, is accompanied by a temptation to reproduce the experience as God. The taste for God is debased into a greed to be God. We abandon the personal presence of God and take up with the impersonal serpent. We flee the shining face of God for a slithery world of religion that gives us license to manipulate people and acquire godlike attributes for ourselves. The moment we begin cultivating the possibility of acquiring that kind of power and glory for ourselves, we will flee from the presence of the Lord and seek a place where we can become more prominent and acquire more power. This is what led to the downfall of Adam and Eve. This is also what leads to our own downfall when we find ourselves, like them, living far apart from the presence of God. So this is kind of a reflection on the deeper struggle of us being tempted, like Adam and Eve were tempted, to be more like God and to have God be less a part of our lives. As we start to grow and start to have independence, as we start to realize our own gifts and talents and possibilities of what we can do, there is a temptation to just completely take control of your own life, to not be dependent on God or anyone else. There is a temptation to do that. There's a temptation to become the only one in the driver's seat of your life. And that is kind of what, if we look at the temptation here, it's the temptation for, well, if God knows good and evil, I want to know it. And if I can know it, then I don't need God anymore because I can do what God is doing. It's like God's holding me back. God doesn't want me to be in control. And what God is saying is that you don't want my job. God says you don't want to be completely in control because you don't know everything. Now, on the other hand, God does encourage us to know more, to grow more, to become more independent, yet at the same time to never let go of the mystery and the dependence that we have on the God that has put us here on this earth from the very beginning. We need to live in the presence of God. We need to be close to God, in relationship with God, in order to live that fulfilled life. We need to leave certain things to God that it's not our business to handle. It's not our business to try to control. It's not our business to try to take for ourselves. There are certain things that God can do a much better job with, because he understands more and he is, the creator of all this. God will give us the things that we need in due time. And I think what happens is, like we see in this story, we want to take control of more instead of just kind of follow after God's lead and respond in God's timing. We get too eager, and like Peterson says, we get greedy. So this story is trying to kind of show that essential part of us as human beings that leads to our downfall. It led to the downfall of the first humans, and it's the same temptation, the same essential temptation that will lead us out of the presence of God or away from that good garden life that God has created for us. So we need to stay in the right relationship with God. And it's not a relationship where God wants us to be robots, or God wants us just to be so unquestionably obedient that we don't take any responsibility or risk on our own. I think God wants us to grow, but the thing is, like, the timing and the motivation behind us wanting more needs to be in the right place. And if it's not in the right place, we end up really messing up our lives. This is now God's response to the serpent in verse 14 of Genesis 3. God told the serpent, "Because you've done this, you're cursed. Cursed beyond all cattle and wild animals, cursed to slink on your belly, to eat the dirt all of your life. I'm declaring war between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He'll wound your head, you'll wound his heel." So this is this is going into a description of the consequences of the decisions that the serpent, the woman, and the man have made. It goes in the same sequence as the ones that have eaten from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. First it was the serpent, then it was the woman, then it was the man. It doesn't specifically say in the text that the serpent ate of the tree, but it looks like he's the first to be disobedient or to do something he wasn't supposed to. So the first thing God does is he announces that there's a curse on the serpent. Now notice that the reason why it's a serpent in this story is that animal fits into, it's the lowest of creatures because it's on the ground. It's interesting that the serpent is eating dirt all its life. Now this is not like, we don't see snakes literally eating dirt, but it is on the ground with his mouth close to the ground all the time, except when it's getting up into the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or other trees in your backyard in South Florida. But basically the serpent's place is on the ground and eating dirt. Isn't it interesting that the serpent is eating dirt and the humans are made out of dirt? So the serpent is eating the stuff that the humans are made out of. Why is that? Well, something to think about. He says he's declaring a war or enmity between the woman and the serpent and their offspring and hers. So this is likely not literally about snakes, but this is about the tempter or the accuser or temptation itself. We can see that there will be an ongoing temptation in our lives. The temptation doesn't overcome us, but the temptation still gets us. So it says, he'll wound your head, you'll wound his heel. So the serpent is the one that is having his head stepped on or crushed, but the serpent is also biting the heel of the human. And that is kind of describing this ongoing concept of temptation. I think that you'll always have this, you'll always have this thing biting you in the foot. It doesn't totally kill you or disarm you, but it's like this really annoying thing that keeps happening. But you can still step on temptation. You can put it under your foot, but it's still going to impact you in a certain way. So there's this ongoing, painful, annoying thing that continues to happen. Verse 16, God told the woman, I'll multiply your pains in childbirth. You'll give birth to your babies in pain. You'll want to please your husband, but he'll lord it over you. So this is the description of the primary things that the woman deals with. Is it's the blessing of childbirth, but it comes at this heavy price, and that's this painful price of having children. And then there is the also a strain on the relationship between the man and the woman. God is saying this is something that you'll deal with as well. So it's painful, the painful process of birthing children, the painful process of keeping a relationship with your husband. Those are the things you'll have to deal with. And then he says to the man, I need to keep track of time here. Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from, do not eat from this tree. The very ground is cursed because of you. Getting food from the ground will be as painful as having babies is for your wife. You'll be working in pain all your life long. This is where Peterson is, maybe that's a poetic license here, that the man's pain will be as painful as having babies is. There's probably some debate on that. Maybe having babies takes all that pain and just like squeezes it down into some minutes and hours or days, whereas the man's pain is spread out over a long period of time. Maybe that's how you can say that those two would be comparable. Who knows? The ground will sprout thorns and weeds. You'll get food the hard way, planting and tilling and harvesting, sweating in the fields from dawn to dusk until you return to that ground yourself, dead and buried. You'll start out as dirt. You'll end up dirt. So here's dirt again. Remember, Adam and Eve, the humans are made from dirt. The serpent is cursed to eat dirt. The humans are named after dirt. And then you have the relationship from now on with the dirt is going to be a painful and complicated relationship. The dirt is where you're going to get your food from. That's where you come from. But it's going to be a hard and toilsome task of continuing to stay alive until that day when the earth eats you. And then you go back and you become dirt again. Wherever you came from, you go back to. So it's, our relationship with the dirt, with the earth we still completely and totally depend upon this earth for what it produces for us to live and be alive. But it's a painful relationship between it. And so these are the consequences or the curses that we see described in Genesis 3. And let's go ahead and wrap up Genesis 3. So we got verse 20 to the end, to verse 24. The man, known as Adam, named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. God made leather clothing for Adam and his wife and dressed them. God said, "The man has become like one of us, capable of knowing everything, ranging from good to evil. What if he now should reach out and take fruit from the tree of life and eat and live forever? Never, this cannot happen." So God expelled them from the Garden of Eden and sent them to work the ground, the same dirt out of which they'd been made. He threw them out of the garden, stationed angel cherubim and a revolving sword of fire east of it, guarding the path to the tree of life. So here's where we see the names for man and woman. The man, the woman is what these two characters are called. All the way up to this point, it's not until, which is kind of interesting, that their names before were man and woman, and then after they have the curse, and then they become Adam and Eve. Then they have more specific personal names. And it says apparently that what they tried to put on and clothe themselves to hide their shame, whatever they were using to hide their shame, apparently that wasn't good enough. So the first thing is God makes leather clothing for Adam and Eve and dress them. Now, that's a simple phrase, but think about what that means. What that means is that God is the first to take life, the life of an animal, because we know where leather comes from. So that's interesting. There's not commentary on it, but basically it is God providing what they need to cover their shame, but it comes at a price, and it comes at the price of life. So that's in that phrase. And then we see God says something interesting. In fact, he says, basically, he acknowledges that what the serpent said, the temptation of the serpent to the woman, is pretty much the truth. God said, this is verse 22, God said, "The man has become like one of us, capable of knowing everything, ranging from good to evil. What if he now reaches out and takes the fruit of the tree of life to eat and lives forever? No, this cannot happen." So, beforehand, God did not tell Adam and Eve that they could not eat of the tree of life. That was not off limits. He did say you don't want to know everything. And the serpent is the one that tells the woman, this is why God doesn't want you to eat of this, because if you do, you'll know a whole lot more than you know now. You'll know as much as God knows. So she's tempted to do that. She's tempted to know what God knows or to be more like God. The serpent was right in that it does open them up to an experience like God, to know more. They will grow. They will know about good and evil. And God even says, well, now that they've done it, now they know good and evil. Now is where he says, okay, now we cannot allow them to. We're not giving them the freedom of choice in this one. We cannot allow them to live forever. So we need to close up the garden. Now it's off limits to them so that they don't eat of it and live forever. Interesting, very interesting things to kind of like meditate on and think about. And let me just look at, we've got some comments here. The man who tilled the earth in the times of creation had to overcome many trials, such as clearing the land, tilling with a stick, etc. Perhaps that is what God was talking about when he compared man's birth to woman's during childbirth. Interesting comments, Jason. Perhaps that is what God was talking about when he compared man's pain to a woman's during childbirth. Right. It was a painful process. We see pain is in the results for all of those who are a part of creation. It's going to be a painful life for the serpent, a painful life for the woman, a painful life for the man. Pain is a big part. Pain and shame. And just think about how much of our lives that are difficult and challenging for us are related to those two things, pain and shame. We complicate them by, we'll get into that some other time, but basically we kind of narrow it down. Pain and shame are the big things that we deal with in life. They're challenging to us. We'll make some more comments next time about this idea of the knowledge of good and evil, why God says don't do it, and then he acknowledges that, if you want to know more, it comes at a price. And so we'll continue on. I believe chapter 4 is when we get into the first family, and we got that sibling rivalry between Cain and Abel, and we'll look and see what that might say to us or have for us next time. All right, let us be sent. Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May each thought and word bring glory to your name. Send us out in your Spirit, Lord, we pray. Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May each thought and word bring glory to your name. Send us out in your Spirit, Lord, we pray. All right, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining in. I'll look forward to continuing on in the book of Genesis with you next week. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.